The next method of suspect identification we will cover is voice identification. One of the most famous cases of voice identification dates back to 1936 and involved the famous aviator Charles Lindbergh. Charles's 20-month-old son was kidnapped around 9 p.m. from the nursery on the second floor of their home. A ransom note was found on the windowsill asking for $50,000, while a second ransom note was received 5 days later, which increased the ransom to $70,000. Over the next 2 months, there ended up being a total of 12 ransom notes, and eventually an exchange was orchestrated for the kidnapper to exchange the money for directions to Charles's son. Charles attended the exchange with another man, John Condon, and waited in the car while the exchange took place. Unfortunately, they were double-crossed, and the man got away with the money, and the directions proved to be useless. Shortly thereafter, the body of Charles's son was found near the house. The investigation lasted several years, and when they finally arrived in court, Charles testified that Bruno Richard Hauptmann was the voice he heard from 3 years previously, when he had been waiting in the car at the exchange. This was part of the evidence that was presented that convicted Hauptmann, as well as led to his eventual execution. A positive result of that case is the fact that it spawned research on voice identification. A year later, Francis McGehee, a psychology professor at the University of Illinois, had his students listen to a person read a 56-word passage from behind a screen. The students were tested at various times to see whether they could pick the reader from a group of 5 voices. The next day, students were able to identify the person with 83% accuracy. But as you can see in this chart, that accuracy significantly declined after 2 weeks and was worse than chance after 3 weeks. These results really put Lindbergh's claim that he remembered the man's voice after 3 years into question. As with other methods of suspect identification, voice identification rests on several premises. Most importantly, it rests on the premise that every voice is individually characteristic enough to distinguish from others. The first factor in determining voice uniqueness lies in the size of the vocal cavities and oral cavities, and the shape, length, and tension of the person's vocal cords. A person's vocal cavities are resonators, much like organ pipes, which reinforce some of the overtones produced by the vocal cords, which produce formats and voice print bars. With regard to use patterns, it involves the manner in which the articulators or muscles of speech are manipulated during speech. The articulators include the lips, teeth, tongue, soft palate, and jaw muscles, and they contribute to the interplay which produces intelligible speech. As a result, the chance that 2 speakers would have identical voice cavity dimensions and configurations coupled with identical articulator use patterns is extremely remote. Even though these chances may be remote, this fact differs significantly from a person's ability to distinguish these sounds and remember them over time. Research on ear witness performance, or the ability to later identify a voice, has been less than promising. An FBI study examining 2,000 cases found an error rate of 31% for false identifications and 53% for false eliminations. Subsequent research has found that there are several factors that tend to impact a person's ability to recognize a voice. The first is subject preparedness. Essentially, people who were unprepared for a voice memory test performed more poorly than when they were prepared. This fact is especially relevant during investigations, considering someone who is a victim of a crime is likely not prepared when they are faced with the situation. Thereby, they are already at a disadvantage to remember any possible identifying information. The second factor is voice sample duration. As might be expected, voice samples presented for longer durations are remembered with more accuracy. However, this effect is dramatically reduced if the tone is changed from the first presentation to the second. As we discussed earlier, the retention interval is crucial, with recall occurring shortly after hearing the voice sample is being more accurate than later attempts. Lastly, errors can creep in when there are changes in the content and form of speech between the initial encounter and subsequent recognition. Ear witness testimony is pretty much only allowed in jurisdictions that follow the Daubert standard. In jurisdictions using this standard, a judge may admit such evidence if it will assist the finder of fact, the jury, in better understanding the case as a whole. However, various jurisdictions use different standards, which can cause trouble for cases that progress to the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. There are several precautions that some courts have attempted to take, such as allowing the jury to see the spectrograms, allowing the jury to hear the recordings, allowing the jury to view the expert's qualifications and be educated about the reliability of voice identification, and also giving the jury further instructions about how to assign weight to any ear witness evidence that is presented in court.